I'm John Gibson. Tonight we celebrate America's birth with a special holiday edition of Fox Magazine. As I mentioned earlier in the show, this is the 100th anniversary of flight. And no celebration of this historic event would be complete without a salute to flight attendants. They've served us peanuts, stowed our baggage, risked their lives for our safety, and now a new book, Come Fly With Us, traces the evolution of the airline hostess from in-flight caregiver to flying bombshell to expert lifesaver.
Come fly with me, let's fly away. If you can use some exotic booze, there's a bar in far Bombay.
Well, the root of the idea for Come Fly With Us was when I first flew from Los Angeles to San Francisco, and I got on the plane and the flight attendant kissed me. And she was with PSA, she was wearing a heart-shaped hat, and that stimulated my interest in flying. So Come Fly With Us really started on my first flight of the United States.
I never got kissed by a flight attendant, but I just think it's a fascinating history. It's got the romance of flying and public perceptions about working women all over the world and fantastic fashions.
It was broadly the best job. All through the 40s, 50s, and 60s, when they talked to young women about to leave school or college, the three most desired glamour jobs were actress, model, flight attendant. Not always in that order. Flight attendants got to see the world. One of the requirements of being a flight attendant was you had to be single, no dependents. And the great sea change was the sexual revolution. So you had women who were single and on the pill. And this altered the whole perception of female flight attendants. And also it altered, I think, the role of women in the air. They were used from that moment on, right through the 60s, as bait to lure male passengers. The whole stewardess thing started on April the 15th, 1930, with the original 8 United flight attendants, and here they are in their 1930 uniforms. At that time they had to be registered nurses because flights were bumpy, people got sick, and were desperately frightened. To be selected for the airlines, you had to meet the airline's personnel man, who weighed and measured you and shook you around to see if you could stand flying. And it really helped to be in a swimsuit. I don't know why.
Requirements for air hostesses were strict in the 1930s. They had to be single with no dependents, under 25 years old, a maximum of 5'5" and 115 pounds, and they also had to have 20/20 vision. Isabella is wearing one of the original 8 uniforms from the United Museum. The cape featured pockets which had to be deep enough to carry a wrench to secure the wicker chairs to the floor, and also timetables from the railroads to help stranded passengers get to the right train during the many forced landings.
By 1936, flying had become really comfortable. Double-decker sleeper planes. This is breakfast in bed in 1936. Nothing like that for many, many years afterwards. And they had to be trained in basic aeronautics, so they went into a flight simulator. And they learned exactly how a plane operated, and they could discuss that with the passengers, and since they flew low, they could point out the sights as they went over them. During World War II, women had piloted planes to deliver them to Air Force bases, so they flew bombers and fighters, but at the end of the war, there were no flying jobs for women unless they were flight attendants. And the boys were home for the war, and they were buying houses, and they wanted a house and a family. And so flight attendants were the perfect wives. They were as adept at mixing a martini as they were mixing a baby's formula. And if they didn't know how to mix a martini, the airlines gave them a book, showing them exactly how to mix drinks for the boys. Flight attendants were usually married within 18 months, and so all of this practice was really good for them. And if you hadn't got the idea that a flight attendant was the perfect wife, the magazines would tell you. In this article, the writer says, what better wife could you have than someone who could smile for 5 hours, remember 150 people's names and what they wanted for dinner.
In the 1950s, they were fairly demure outfits, as you would expect for the perfect wife, which was the whole sort of attitude of the 1950s. And in the 60s, since women suddenly became marketing tools, they started wearing wild paper outfits. These 2 uniforms supported TWA's Foreign Accents campaign. The campaign had stewardesses dressed in notional, traditional European and American outfits, and they served foreign cuisine in flight. Heidi is dressed in a gold mini, which represents the French, and Christian is wearing the Manhattan penthouse hostess pajamas. In the 1960s, stewardesses set the fashions. This is United's Skimmer, which was designed by Hollywood's famed Jean-Louis. Comfort was important because in the 1960s, preloaded food trays didn't exist, so the attendants had to make hundreds of trips to the galley to serve drinks, meals, and coffee. Probably the most notable campaign of the 1960s is the Braniff Airstrip, where flight attendants actually did an airborne striptease. Eastern did a series of campaigns. One was a little black book on the way to Miami, so you could write down flight attendants' names and numbers. It wasn't until the 1970s that the AFA, the Association of Flight Attendants, won a series of legal battles for female flight attendants. It was 1971 when the no marriage rule was finally struck down. It was, I think, 1975 when airlines started to liberalize their weight restrictions, so women didn't have to be 120 pounds anymore. They could finally be married, they could have babies. There's one thing that's kind of interesting as far as the future. A lot of people who have read the book have told me, oh my gosh, things used to be so sexist, and it's just amazing to see, but of course, what goes around comes around again, I guess. There is now a Hooters airline, and apparently they serve, beer and chicken wings by women in scantily clad outfits. My frat boy brother would love this. And also there are clothing optional flights from Miami. There's sort of a party plane from Miami to Cancun, and they're clothing optional. So all sorts of crazy stuff going on in the air again.
And a portion of the book's profits goes to the Association of Flight Attendants Disaster Relief Fund, which aids the families of flight attendants who died on 9/11.